All right. It's 33 minutes past. Let's kick off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Maximizing the Benefits of ERP Changes webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited that you're here, and I know that you're going to leave our time together brimming with knowledge, questions, and more clarity when it comes to your ERP migration or upgrade in relation to a Coupa implementation. So, although you're going to be drinking from a fire hose, so to speak, during our time together, we'd love to hear from you over the course of the webinar. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. We'll do our very best to get to all of them at the end of our time together during the Q&A session. If we don't get to your question before time is up, please don't panic. Your questions absolutely matter to us. And so one of our experts will reach out to you after the webinar to answer any questions we didn't get to during our time. You would have received a reminder email about the webinar today. In that mail is a white paper and a Q&A document as a pre-read for this event. If you didn't do your homework, that's fine. There's no judgment at all. You can go through that in your own time afterwards. But that really summarizes our discussion for today. So just to give you an order of events, so you know what's cooking, our first speaker, Emil Olkers, who's our Coupa practice lead at Supply Chain Partner, he'll suggest that it may well make sense to implement an ERP connected app, specifically Coupa in this case, at the same time or prior to upgrading or changing your ERP system. Next, we'll have Chris Quartermanch of Glencore. I interviewed him on video. He'll give us a customer perspective on his position, and then he'll be followed by Chris Clark of Coupa, who'll talk to the question of how this may or may not make financial sense. And so before we continue, I'd love to introduce to you from Supply Chain Partner, Richard Hales, who's the General Manager of Supply Chain Partner UK and also looking after Europe. Richard, good to see you.
Hey, Ran.
Hi.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to say a few words before we get into the meat of the event, really about Supply Chain Partners. So without going through every single bullet on the slide, you can read faster than I can talk. I just wanted to say that Supply Chain Partner been around for about 9 years, pretty much doubling every year in terms of reach and scope and size. And I guess the reason for that principally is the company was founded by procurement specialists and isn't entirely focused on procurement rather than being a general purpose system integrator. So as a consequence, that's why Supply Chain Partner is very good with understanding what matters. And whilst Coupa can be implemented as in a variety of ways, it's exceptionally configurable. Coupa is exceptionally configurable. It can be implemented well, and it can be implemented not so well. And if it's implemented by procurement experts, it's absolutely tuned to the business processes of the customer. So that's what we seek to do. I'm really pleased that we're able to present this seminar to you today, and thank you very much for your time and attention. I'm going to hand you back to Ren now to carry on the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. What a terrible host I am. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Ren. I work for Supply Chain Partner. I handle business development in sub-Saharan Africa and lead generation globally. So that's who's taking you on this journey today, and excited to be with you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Emil Olkers, Associate Director at Supply Chain Partner, looks after Coupa operations in the African and European regions. Emil, good to see you this morning.
Hey, everyone. Good to see you too.
Good. All right. So, Emil, Gartner recently stated, and I quote, there will be a tsunami of SAP S/4HANA adoption between 2021 and 2023. Can you speak to perhaps the challenges that might be facing companies who need to migrate or upgrade their ERPs from a Coupa perspective, and then specifically speaking to SAP ECC upgrade to S/4HANA?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's obviously, depending on the type of migration you want to do, the challenges might be considerably more, considerably less. If you do or move from one ERP brand to another one, typically you would have a lot more challenges than moving from one version of an ERP to a later one. So, but there's, no matter which of these instances or scenarios you are in, I suppose there's 3 or 4 kind of challenges that are universal. I tend to, or try to call them, or silent killers, because these are the ones I'm going to touch on today, are the ones that often go a little bit unnoticed, and they catch organizations out because the impact that they have, if not handled correctly, is far worse than they might expect. So the first one that we normally look at is a lack of ownership. So because an ERP touches almost every area in your business, it's very often a scenario where there's misaligned goals and expectations of what the ERP needs to, or the new ERP needs to bring to you across these different business areas. And together with that, these expectations often need to obviously be incorporated into the budget that you have to implement and to migrate to new ERP. And it very seldom happens that all requirements can be met with the budget that's available. That means that there needs to be some compromises. So I suppose the danger with that is that if not handled correctly, some key stakeholders might take a step back and not participate so much and want to almost give ownership over to the remainder of the stakeholders involved in the project. And that the knock-on effect of that really is that you need all those key stakeholders to drive the goals throughout their user community, and you often need them to make key business decisions in how you design a system. The system design is not only a technical thing; it's more a business process, and a lot of business decisions that need to get made. And then if you don't have these key stakeholders that are prepared to kind of make those decisions and stand by them, then you run into scenarios where things need to change shortly after an implementation, or you take a very long time to make decisions. And as a result, costs increase. And then I think the last thing that plays a role in lack of ownership might also be resource capacity. So normally what happens is that the resources that partake in an ERP migration project from the customer's point of view also have a day job. So they need to now try and manage these two things. And that is very, very difficult sometimes to do. And as a result, customers would try and almost put more of the responsibility on the service provider. Unfortunately, again, like we said, service providers do not know your business as well as you do. So you definitely need these key resources in a project. But that can be one of the other main contributors to a lack of ownership in a project. Then the next challenge that you might face is data cleansing, or the effort related to data cleansing and migration. That is often overlooked as well. If you talk about data on a high level, it doesn't sound complicated. Cleaning your suppliers doesn't sound like a difficult thing to do, but the devil is in the details when it comes to data. So what often happens is you plan for a certain effort, and when people start getting into that detail, there's a lot more challenges in there than you would expect, and the solutions are not as simple as you would think it would be. So it takes a lot longer than you've expected to do that. And it's also something that's very difficult to then, at short notice, outsource to an outside party, because again, your data, you know a lot better than anyone else. So that's something that you should own, because it's, again, a data decision is a business decision that needs to be made. And I'd say the last thing that often, or last challenge that kind of goes under the radar often is new functions and features in an ERP. And the main reason for that is that often new functions and features also implicates a change in how the old functions and features work. So you might look at new functions and features of the ERP and decide that you don't want to use these necessarily, but it might be that something that you could do in the old system does not work the same way in the new system anymore, because it's now being combined with a new feature. So you need to be aware that you might have to make some changes to your current design, even if you are not planning to use a full new feature or function that's available. Then if I look at SAP specific, so obviously on this call, I think there's people that probably know a lot more about the differences between ECC and S4. We look at SAP, but from a procurement point of view, us working with Coupa and mostly on the procurement side, there's a couple of things I can highlight that we've picked up. The one is that there are some business or data structure changes. So as an example, you have, for example, customers and suppliers that you would have in the old ECC versions of SAP are now combined into one business object that's called a business partner. So any data related operations or customizations that used to deal with these two entities in your new S4 environment would need to be amended or changed to now work with this one business partner object. The second one, kind of just referred to it as customizations. I think there's probably very few SAP instances in the world that do not contain customizations specifically related to those customers. And going through this project or this type of migration, you have to go and challenge all those customizations again, make sure they will still be relevant with the new functionality that comes with S4. And the ones that you decide to take across to your S4 environment would most likely require some changing and testing, etc., to make it work in that new environment. And then I think the last one would be the SAP Fiori apps. So Fiori is a capability that SAP now has. It's basically a layer that plugs on top of the base of SAP platform, and it makes the user experience a little bit easier on SAP. So no more having to know a transaction code to get to a certain activity. You can click on a tile. But again, together with that, I think it ties closely to the new features of functions discussion, or point I raised just now, is that if you decide to use Fiori, some of your processes will now flow between Fiori and your base SAP platform. And as a result, some of the configuration might need to change, or setup might need to change from what you currently have.
Yeah, very, very helpful. Sounds to me like slapping new tech onto broken or non-optimal processes may not be the greatest idea. So the ERP upgrade could be a wonderful time to relook processes and potentially redesign target operating models. And I'm hearing that change management and stakeholder buy-in are key during this process. Very insightful. Are there any benefits associated with implementing Coupa ahead of or in parallel to an ERP change or upgrade, rather than waiting until the ERP project is complete?
Yeah, definitely. So suppose making a decision to do the implementation prior to your ERP migration or together with would all depend on your timing and how far in future you would want to perform or run the ERP migration. But that said, any of these scenarios have more advantages than implementing after your ERP migration only. So there's a lot of benefits to doing it not after, but prior to at the same time. The couple of things that I can highlight is typically that you design a solution for an end user as one solution, even though it's two software platforms. So from the beginning, you cater for how a process would flow from Coupa into ERP and back out, as opposed to having the whole procurement design in an SAP or whichever ERP or bolt in there, and then afterwards having to then bolt Coupa on top of it and then go change everything again. And that basically limits change fatigue, number one, and it helps adoption, because you have users that don't have to kind of deal with the fact that you've got multiple systems, because most end users do not care for that. They care for the user experience. So that's kind of what you want to try and cater for. The second thing is that if you do them together, there's cost savings to be had, because you can certain or shared functions like change management and project management, you can basically apply across both of these implementations at the same time. So you do not have to have them run one after the other and basically doubling the cost, as opposed to increasing the capacity a little bit with one implementation. And then I think the last benefit that you have is that you can have the benefits to using Coupa, the efficiencies and the cost savings that you can achieve, you can realize earlier. So you can get the system, get it into your organization, get people running it, get them to go through the period after hypercare of settling and adoption, and then really start using that system to its full extent and to the full benefit of your organization.
So that's a very interesting thought process. I think the general idea is we're implementing two pieces of software, massive effort, surely we'd want to split them up. But to your point, the fact that the effort is less, that the change is less, that pain is less, and perhaps even a cost saving. That's a very helpful insight. Thanks, Emil. I have another question for you. In the case of SAP, how is the data and end user experience affected, if at all, during such an upgrade?
So if you've got Coupa implemented on your when I say the initial or legacy ERP environment, migrating to the new ERP environment, again, depends on a little bit around the approach you take to that migration. So if it's an optimization exercise where you want to go and change process and you want to go and change the way you do things, then inevitably there will be a couple of changes in Coupa as well. But it means that you might have a user logging into the Coupa environment on the new system, having some additional workflows to complete, or having some additional fields to fill in on certain screens, those kind of things. But it is still within the Coupa environment. So at least the interface that they're working with is exactly the same as they have had before. If you have a scenario where you are migrating your current design onto the new ERP environment, and you have no desire to actually optimize because you feel that that's been done before, then the change might be as little as 1 or 2 drop downs with different values in them, like a payment term where you might have had cleaned up a payment term list and those kind of things, and the user might actually only experience those kind of things, if at all.
Yeah, wonderful, Emil. Thank you so much. Incredibly insightful. Appreciate your time.
Thanks. Pleasure.
Good. Good. All right, folks. So our next guest is not with us in person. I'd hate to wake him at 2 in the morning to answer our questions. And so what we did was interview him pre this webinar. His name is Chris Kordemansch. He's from Glencore. He's the innovation manager and the Coupa lead at Glencore, and has a heap of experience with exactly what we're talking about now. So Richard, if you could hit that video for us, that interview, that'd be great. I'd like to again welcome to our stage Mr. Chris Kordemansch, innovation manager and Coupa lead at Glencore. Chris, are you with us?
I am. I am here. How are you doing?
Welcome.
Nice to see you again, Ryan.
Yeah, you too, Chris. All right. A couple of questions for you, Chris. What is your experience of Coupa and an ERP migration? Maybe talk a bit of the value and the pains. And I'll tell you, we here, we don't need Coupa, or we won't need Coupa once we've implemented SAP S/4HANA. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think SAP is great at a lot of things, but there's certainly some gaps, and that's where Coupa comes in. So I think it's just about finding the right mix. You know, there's for example, not a great interface for suppliers to interact directly with SAP. So you know, everyone's going to come to the conclusion that you know, if you want to take it to the next level and really engage with your suppliers and increase performance of delivery and engagement with the supplier, increase your catalog spend and your accuracy, I mean, you just need another tool. You need some sort of a cloud software where you can interact with suppliers on the same platform, and that's certainly where we landed. Yeah. In terms of an ERP upgrade, look, I think we've done both. We implemented Coupa across 3 different SAP environments and some non-SAP environments back in 2018, and we've also done an S4 upgrade after being live on Coupa, and we're also in the midst of in parallel S4 upgrade and Coupa implementation. So we've done them all. I think one of the things that we've learned is if you implement the project and you have the same resources in the project, and then you know, a few months later move towards a Coupa project, you end up with a bit of fatigue in your key resources, right? So you're bringing in SMEs from the business, you're bringing in key individuals that you know, that know the business, they're respected by their peers, and those are the people that you want in the project. But if you put them in back-to-back projects, we get a bit of fatigue. That's in our experience anyway. So there is some value to doing it in parallel. Certainly increases the complexity. So I would also say, that you want to make sure that you look at your timeline and you've got the right timeline. Certainly if it's a global project across multiple ERPs, different types of businesses, then you just really have to be cautious that you're taking on a lot at once, and you need to make sure that to put that correct timeline in place, or potentially stagger the rollouts. So those are a couple sort of points of the difference between those types of projects.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Chris. How do you at Glencore upgrade resources with varying degrees of skill and experience across the businesses during projects like this?
Yeah, so we always take the approach. This is really not just purely a technology project. It has to be a business project. I think that's a real key point, and it should be a driver in the project. So that means engaging the business, and that means going into the operations and taking those individuals that have that influence, like I was mentioning, pulling them onto the project and upskilling them. So it also means selecting a good SI and making sure that they're working hand in hand and side by side, so that knowledge transfer happens during the project. Once you go live, those resources become even more important to the organization, because they're passing that knowledge on to other folks in the site, and you can leverage that during those early months when you're in hypercare and you're trying to stabilize the environment. So I think that's key. Also, for us, we've done both approaches, face to face, and we've done remote projects, and we really stumbled on doing things remotely, especially in terms of knowledge transfer. You try to do a training session over the web, and the reality is people are just doing a number of other things while the training is happening and not fully focused. They're also maybe not raising their hand and answering questions, not interactive. So so I mean, we've learned we'll never do another remote project. It has to be face to face, at least at the key points of the project. The design workshops, the end user testing, all of those key points of the project. You really need to get together as a group and make sure that those key individuals are in there that will help drive this throughout the business.
Yeah, it's good. Very insightful. We may have covered this in a sense, but perhaps just to hear again, if it makes sense to you to implement Coupa sooner rather than later, for instance, not wait 3 or 4 years down the road until the SAP or the ERP project is done.
So I think there's if you're going to wait, you're really losing out on the value. So in my sense, I'm always rushing to get it in as soon as possible, because you get the value out of it. Once you put Coupa in, at least as far as our approach on the business, we always try to keep users in Coupa, and we really keep them out of the, at least in terms of a supply chain process. Certainly maintenance remains in SAP. But those users that are working within Coupa, there's relatively little change when you do an upgrade down the road, because most of their work will continue to happen in Coupa. So it's really just, remapping some of the files and in the back end and that sort of thing. But the business process remains the same. So, and it's relatively inexpensive to do the upgrade, because you're just really validating the mapping. The environment's already set up, the configuration is already there, and for the most part, it's you're off to the races. So the challenge in that second project where you're upgrading to S4 is relatively low if you've already got Coupa in place.
Yeah, that's good. Very helpful. And then can you give us some insights into how the market and Glencore in particular is responding to the need to move to S4?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it within our company today. We're getting a lot of momentum to continue to roll it out. So we've rolled it out in North America. We've gone through to South America. We've rolled it out in Africa last year, and we're working on some sites in Europe today. So I'm seeing the momentum. There's it's like I was saying earlier, there's just some gaps in terms of especially around engaging suppliers and increasing your on-contract spend. There's just some gaps in how SAP operates. It's a wonderful tool. It's a great finance tool. It's a great maintenance tool. But in terms of engaging with suppliers, there's some gaps. So yeah, we're seeing that driver across our business. That's for sure.
Hey, it's me again. I'm going to ask Chris to join us. And Chris, if you'd like to introduce yourself, I'll be asking you a few questions now that we've finished with Chris Kurtulmuch. Chris Clark.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. So Chris Clark, Cooper Software. I lead strategic advisory services for the EMEA region. We have two primary functions, I guess. The first is the annual benchmark report that Cooper generates, which is based on our observations and analysis of Cooper's best performing clients. We've got in excess of $4 trillion in spend from thousands of customers flowing through the Cooper platform every year, which gives us a really sound basis for calculating the 20 KPIs that make up the benchmark report. And we've got a really high level of confidence in the data that underpins that and in those KPIs. So we're really proud. It's the industry's only collection of benchmarks that is based on real hard spend data. If you've not seen it, then I highly recommend you download it. It's available on the cooper.com homepage. And even if you're not currently transforming in this space, it does give insights that are useful for operational teams as well. The second thing that my team focuses on is for individual customers, we use the same tooling as we use for the benchmark report to provide a diagnostic of an individual customer's performance. And we relate that to their highest performing peers. So it's much more tailored to the individual organization. It's in their geography, it's against their peers, and we marry that data-driven diagnostic with an interview-style discovery, which can drive meaningful outcomes through really identifying areas where improvements can be made. And at the end of the day, our success is based entirely on our customers being successful. So having a way to really measure that current state and then provide a properly evidenced view of future state performance is really important. And that forms the basis of our value proposition with respect to an individual customer. It also means that we can choose which organizations it doesn't make sense for us to work with because the benefits won't justify the investment. We're very transparent about when it's right to work with us and what are the right things to do. And we know that this approach works because customer and supplier adoption levels are over 80%. And that in turn drives all of the benefits from compliance and reduction in effort and cost and fraud and remediation. It's just good business, something that legacy vendors, and we heard Chris talking about this a minute ago, they generally struggle with this.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. It's interesting you mentioned the benchmark report. It took me quite a while to get my head around the unique value of Cooper, and I don't want to flatter you too much here, but the fact that Cooper collects anonymized data about every single transaction of all those trillions of dollars of spend that go through the platform, collects that data, anonymizes it, and then uses it to play back and give value back to the customers. That's something that there's nothing else out there like it. It's just
no, as I said earlier, it really is central to our value proposition and something we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my questions then. So first question is, can we measure the value of adding Cooper versus the status quo, the old paper processes or whatever you were doing before for procurement?
Yeah, I prepared something in advance of this. Can we have that first slide, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. So I tried to, I could talk about this all day, but I tried to really simplify it and get it into a way that makes it consumable for everyone. So on the right-hand side, we're showing a summary of the outputs from the benchmark report. So it's the critical business KPIs for spend management. And I know it's hard to read on this slide, so I'll give you some sort of highlights from it. Chris earlier mentioned on-contract spend. So the benchmark is showing that our top performing customers are getting 79.2% of their spend on contract. So, there's accuracy, there's detail, decimal places in this that are kind of a bit irrelevant, I guess, but they come out from the really detailed assessment that we're doing. Requisition to order cycle time is benchmarked at 4.5 hours. The percentage of invoices that are coming into the organization electronically, which means they can be processed automatically, that's in excess of 80%. And first time match rate for invoices. In other words, the requisition order and invoices are matching is in excess of 87%. So all of these things, you can immediately appreciate how that can drive value against where maybe your organization is today. And the value gets presented in terms of time savings, but also direct cost reduction, and the benefits from compliance, risk reduction, and adoption in the business. And we also benchmark ESG and diversity. So for organizations that have got initiatives in those spaces, we're able to support them and show them what good looks like there, or I guess the art of the possible. On the left-hand side, we've got a diagram that represents the workflows for the different spend management tasks, all flowing through this one unifying platform, the Coupa platform, that's optimized to enable customers to achieve similar performance to what's in the benchmarks. That's kind of the target for everyone. As customers use the system, it surfaces the performance indicators alongside the business data actually in the system. So for example, if you can show a supply risk score when you're raising a requisition, or you can show a user their approval time ranked against other users. So you're trying to incent the kind of soft behaviors that drive the indicators in the right direction. And that therefore improves the outcome for the business. And for those looking to adopt Coupa, my team will produce a diagnostic assessment. I spoke about it earlier, but it shows how they compare to the benchmarks and where we should focus to get closer to best in class. And that can put a value against each KPI in the context of your business, so you know what that improvement's worth to you. And having the as-is assessment and a really solid prediction of likely future state takes a lot of risk out of any decision to invest in Coupa. You know what you're going to get from it, and we have a high level of confidence in that. And having that data, as we said earlier, and the tooling to use it, and there's a whole team sitting behind me who have the tools and the expertise to rapidly process all of this data. That's been a key part of our rapid growth, Coupa's rapid growth, and something that we see other vendors are not really able to do in the same way. So also on this slide, it's showing the conceptual links between Coupa and one or more ERP systems, excuse me. And I say or more because larger organizations often have many more. For example, Walmart has more than 90 systems all connecting to Coupa. And across the globe, there's many billions of interactions through APIs every year. And being able to really quickly and easily configure those connections is part of our value proposition. And in the same way that Ariba is separate from S/4HANA, we coexist with underlying finance platforms across all of our customers. So this is, really part of what we do. Perhaps the difference is that we're agnostic to any underlying platform. We don't mind if it's SAP or Microsoft, Oracle, or anyone else. And as Chris said earlier, when Coupa customers change their ERP systems, the Coupa users across the business often don't even notice the change which has happened. And that's great for business continuity and saving on change management. But I would just qualify this and say, clearly, if there's process changes going on around the procurement process, then that tuning, that might impact what the users see, and they might see some change.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Next question really is, we already asked this of the other speakers, but what's the commercial implication of deciding to implement immediately or postponing?
Right. So, yeah, and I prepped something on this too, and this is a core part of what we're talking about with clients in this space. what's the real hard benefit of doing a source to pay implementation of Coupa early, before you've changed your ERP solution. And this slide is modeling two scenarios so that we can see the value and the delta between the two options. And I just say this is summary information. Sitting behind it is a comprehensive build-up of the KPIs and the value contributed by each. So we've got all of that model sitting behind it. And these numbers are based on an organization with about 550 million pounds of spend under management. So we redo these numbers for each customer so that we've got a benefit model that's specific to that customer situation. But what it's showing is that by implementing, this is scenario one, implementing the full source to pay in advance of changing the ERP, not only do you deliver the great user experience that Chris was talking about, but you also deliver the financial benefits much earlier. And in this example, the net benefit over 5 years is 36 million pounds, contrasting with doing source to contract in parallel with ERP, but delaying the procure to pay section, which is a scenario where you lose about 25 million of those benefits. So, this has to be something that customers at least investigate, have the conversation. We've got lots of examples of where Coupa, or using Coupa to isolate the business from the disruption of other technical change, has been absolutely the right thing to do for them. And one thing that's often asked in this space is that reintegration cost. So what's the cost of hooking Coupa up to the upgraded or changed ERP system? And from our research, it normally comes in around 10% of the original implementation costs. So in the scheme of things, that's fairly minor. And given that the ERP system will require less configuration because the procurement functions have been offloaded, might even cost less overall.
Yeah, we did some work ourselves internally at SCP and came to the same conclusion that if you already have Coupa connected to an ERP and you lift it and reconnect it to your upgraded or new ERP, the effort is significantly less than connecting it in the first place. So I have another question for you, Chris.
Sure.
SAP, we're talking specifically about SAP today. They have a procurement service, Ariba, and why would anybody buy Coupa if they could buy Ariba?
Yeah, good question, and something that we are addressing every day here at Coupa. There's a big install base of SAP, obviously, and Ariba is very accessible to those people, to those customers. And there's a whole bunch of things here, and I won't get into all of them, but the big one is what Chris was saying earlier about adoption, in particular supplier adoption. And he made a bunch of really good points about the challenges in using Ariba beyond, or using SAP beyond its really core strengths. And that's in one domain, that's exactly the problem that Coupa is solving for SAP customers. And it's the value is completely dependent on how well the solution is used, whatever solution it is. And as I've said, our benchmarks and the results we get from our customers is in excess of 80% adoption that's by business users. So users within the business able to perform their work really simply and quickly and easily, and with a high degree of automation and a high degree of AI driving decision making, which makes it really accessible for them. But that same sort of focus on usability is driving high adoption by our customers' suppliers as well. So we're seeing in excess of 80% adoption by our best performing customers with their suppliers. So that drives a lot of value. The supplier angle is really important because that's what enables electronic ordering and electronic invoicing. In other words, that's that straight through processing of orders and invoices, and it really simplifies the process and is a big optimization driver for cost. But there's lots of soft things off that as well. You're removing a lot of risk when you take manual process out, and you're able to do compliance checks in real time. And that then drives down fraud, and obviously there's improvements in cycle time, so everyone's happy.
That's perfect. If somebody's not using the tool, then there's no point in having the tool.
Yeah.
So my last question for you, Chris, before we hand back to Ren and a Q&A session is, could the savings made by implementing Coupa, so the diagram on the screen, in year 0, do you think that could pay for your ERP upgrade / migration?
Yeah, I don't have really solid insights into what the ERP upgrade costs, and that depends a lot on versions and level of configuration or customization and scale and all of that stuff. But clearly, if you're able to contribute £25 million in this example back into the ERP implementation program or upgrade program, then that's got to go a long way to easing the pain of that project. So yeah, potentially could pay for all of it. If not, you're at least paying for some of it.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, hopefully £25 million would cover it for this organization.
You would hope so, yes.
That's great. Thanks very much, Chris. I'm going to hand back over to Ren now and ask him to look after a final Q&A session. Ren, are you there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Richard. And thanks so much, Chris. So insightful. We appreciate your time, man. Very good. Gentlemen, Chris, if you could stay on screen, Emil, if you could come on screen, please. I've got a couple of questions for you, gentlemen. Chris, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
Where do the dollar value savings come from, and how are they calculated?
Okay. Yeah, a good question, and that's really central to what my team does. So I'm very happy to get that sort of question. There's many drivers for savings, and so we've done a whole bunch of modeling which basically looks at those KPIs that are surfaced that are really accessible for the business. They understand what they mean, and we've modeled the impact of those KPIs on benefits. So I'll give you some examples. So if you do sourcing and spend on contract and obtain preferential terms with suppliers, that can generate sometimes 10 to 20% of spend value being saved. So that's by ensuring that you're negotiating the best terms and ensuring that the business is complying with requisitions against those suppliers, against those contracts. And in addition to that, another benefit, I guess, of Coupa when for our customers is that we run jointly subscribed sourcing events. So this is where many customers subscribe to a sourcing event, and we facilitate the negotiation of preferential terms for the products that they're subscribing to. And we've got examples of customers where the savings purely from that program more than pay for their Coupa subscription every year. For example, some customers are generating millions of dollars in savings out of this example. Another example I mentioned earlier, straight through processing, electronic purchase order and invoicing. So that generates savings from a reduction in manual tasks. But then there's other softer savings from fraud reduction and a bunch of other drivers that I mentioned earlier. And each of those has a dollar, pound, rand value associated with it that can contribute to the value proposition for Coupa. Yeah. Supplier rationalization is always an interesting one, and Chris mentioned this earlier. The issue with suppliers being able to transact electronically and being properly onboarded and all of those things. Supplier onboarding, if you look at the data from Hackett Group, there's a one-time cost of in excess of $800 to onboard a supplier. So if we're able to identify from the data where the spend with suppliers is going, how that's distributed, and rationalize that, then we can reduce the onboarding cost, and we can also reduce the ongoing maintenance cost of the supplier data. And that's before you've got the savings of preferential terms. And then there's other tools in the Coupa suite that help drive more enhanced savings. Things like advanced analytics gives you much more detailed category insights and enables you to drive more effective supplier and category management. And there's a whole bunch more. I won't go into all of them. But the one in answering this question, for each of the 20 benchmarks, there's a whole bunch of drivers that they contribute towards, and this model really does get quite complex quite quickly. So the team that I mentioned earlier that actually does this data work for me, they've got all the tools and the specialisms to create this stuff and deal with all of that complexity.
Yeah, great, Chris. Amazing, that answer of yours. You kind of think, well, maybe you'll give us 2 or 3 ways that Cooper can value it, and it's just like monumental.
Yeah, I'm a relatively high level person. I've got people in my team who are right down in the weeds on this stuff, and when they get presented with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of spend data transactions, and they can pull insights out of that indicate millions of dollars worth of benefits, then that's absolutely brilliant. I love working with the stuff that they can provide me.
Yeah, it's incredible. Thank you, Chris. Emil, is there any advice how to run a smooth Cooper implementation? What can we do to avoid blocks and overruns?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a couple of big things that you can do. Obviously, during the course of a project, things change and you need to be a little bit agile. But I think the base of the things that you can do is, number one, is to make sure that you prepare properly and do your homework. And with that, I mean in the sales and pre-sales cycles of Cooper already. So if you are going out to the market and you're looking at who's going to implement this for you, spend the time to prepare certain scenarios and a detailed pain point. So not just listing a pain point, but exactly what causes that, so that you can kind of inform the people that do demos and the implementation partner during implementation approach discussions, etc., of these areas of concern that you've got, and kind of make sure that those discussions with service providers are geared towards those things specifically. The danger of not doing that is that you're going to see, can I say, generic application demos. You're going to see generic implementation approaches, because that's where all of us start without knowing your organization. But if you can give us the more detail you can give us, and the more detailed discussions we can have up front, the easier it is to manage expectations and to make sure that everyone's aligned on what's actually going to happen. And I think closely linked to that is be open to advice from the service providers you are talking to, because I know that sometimes the responses or the news are not what you wanted to hear, but a lot of people that you're talking to have a lot of experience in what works and what does not work, and where things can be tweaked and changed, and just what would not fly. So it's always good to pay proper attention to the responses. Then the next one, I think we've covered it between myself and Chris as well, is leave enough effort for data enablement and content enablement. So plan that to be as crucial a stream in your implementation as the actual software that you're going to implement and the actual Cooper design. And then the last thing is keep things as simple as possible. So by that, I mean that don't fall into the trap of trying to fit every single bell and whistle that Cooper offers you into your design initially. Rather, because I mean that can be confusing to both your users and to the people on the project from a customer side. So rather approach it from your business's point of view and say, what do we need to make our business work more efficiently, or procurement work more efficiently, and to resolve our pain points? That is what we need to address, and try and do that as simple and efficient as possible in Cooper. And then that allows you to get a hang of the system. It allows you to iron out all niggles that you might have, and then slowly but surely you can add all the other fancy stuff as you require them.
Thanks, Emil. We have a little back channel chat going on, and Ren's having some technical challenges, so he's just said to me, would I take over? We actually got a question, another question come in, and it's from Chris, and he says, what advice do you have for a company that's already halfway through ERP implementation before they realise they need something else for source to pay. The design and project team is already up and running, starting up the Cooper project, and the project team is afraid and the extra project would delay the ERP implementation. And I guess that question to Emil and Chris, if either of you have a thought on that.
I do. If you want to, Chris, you want to go first, or are you happy that
happy for you to go first, Emil.
Okay, sure. So there's no straightforward answer, but I think one thing to keep in mind is that in most cases, a Cooper implementation can be done in a lot shorter time frame than an ERP implementation. So even if you are quite some way down your ERP implementation already, it might still be worthwhile to look at trying to pull it into the same project. But you would need to basically engage with an implementation partner and with Cooper and determine how best you can now play catch up. The important thing is that you would want to try and get to a point where both of these are at the same stage when you do integration testing and UAT, because you want a UAT an end-to-end process. So if you can catch up before then by all means look at incorporating it. And oftentimes we've had that scenario with our implementations as well. I've had two of them personally where we had to play a bit of catch up because design was almost formalized already for the ERP. But it's then basically just giving the implementation partner good oversight of what you have designed and seeing how you can combine these two things. Maybe shorten the Cooper design cycle because there's a lot of homework that's already been done. They can start off with a much cleaner base or a much more informed base. So there's ways of looking at that. That said, if you are too far down the line, so if you are into the testing side, I would advise it as beneficial as it is to get Cooper in with the ERP. At that point, you might want to consider doing it directly after or shortly after. If you cannot extend your ERP go live, again, that can be a financial decision. It could be due to some licenses that are expiring at a certain point. So there's a lot of considerations around delaying an ERP implementation, as you would know. So that's typically the kind of things you can look at, and then you would have to make the best decision you can with those.
Thanks, Emil. I'm going to just pose one more. I think this one must be for Chris. So if somebody wants to get this like analysis done for their particular business, how difficult or time consuming or costly is that?
Yeah, a good question. And from out of my team, for customers that are looking to adopt Cooper, we provide this as a free of charge service. So that answers the cost question. The sort of route into it is through, it ultimately it comes to me in some form, but a partner or a Cooper AE can help with that introduction. And the actual process, as I mentioned earlier, it's in part based around analysis of your spend data, and it's in part based on the discovery that we do, the interview style discovery that we do that helps to identify pain points and drive the conversation towards those areas where we're going to get the most value and the most improvement. So that sort of answers that question. I would just say on the previous question, there's a couple of points in that actual question. The first is that there is a need to implement something different to the ERP system. So I'd be wanting to understand why and what the time frame is for the need, rather than just look at the technology. And the second thing would be to really understand the value that would come from that. What's the narrative around this need for a change, and how do we position to the business that this is, we have to do this. This isn't an optional thing, and therefore the time and investment that's required to make it happen, where does that come from? Does it, there might be ways to do it without delaying the ERP implementation if we prioritize it in the right way and use an accelerated implementation method. So there's different ways to solve the problem, but really I think the key thing out of that question for me is we'd want to be having a conversation around that particular topic sooner rather than later to figure out what's the art of the possible.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. We're kind of out of time. Ren, do you want to have this off for us?
Yes, absolutely. If the South African electricity will allow me, I'd love to. Load shedding for the win in the middle of a webinar. Can you believe it? Well, thank you for your patience. Folks, that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you again so much for joining us. And thank you, Emil and Chris Quartermanch, who we saw on video, for your time, your invaluable insights. We really appreciate you guys. It's been a joy. A special thank you to Richard, whose brainchild this webinar is. So thank you for that, Richard. And also to Francois Engelbrecht. He really is the glue that stuck all of this experience together from beginning to end. He's been working furiously behind the scenes to ensure that nothing falls over or apart. We appreciate you, Francois. Folks, please enjoy the Q&A document and the white paper. It provides great content to inform your journey and decisions going forward. And we look forward to hearing about your successes on your migration or your upgrade journey. And remember, with just a phone call or an email away, you can see on the screen there on the thank you slide, you can contact sales@supplychainpartner.com. You can stalk any of these guys on screen on LinkedIn. Pretty sure they'll get back to you. Feel free to reach out to any of us. It's been a pleasure. It's been a joy. Thank you for your time. And we look forward to your success. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Cheers, Ron. Thank you.